All right, so I really appreciate you guys hanging in there with me, working through this. Again, I will repost what I was talking about before. Make sure you have a clean copy of that. And we'll go through this, whatever we don't get through in terms of lecturing now because we got hung up. I'll make sure to have kind of a separate video on that as well. So we'll try to make sure at least you get the content. Again, I'm happy to answer questions over email. If we get lots of questions, things like that, we can add some extra time. You can Zoom meet with me, things like that. So what I want to do is go ahead and get into talk about module 19, which is talking about operant conditioning. If for some reason it starts glitching again, please just let me know through chat. But hopefully I think things are smoothed out now. So when we talk about operant conditioning, one of the ways to think about it is a way that's probably relatively familiar to you, which is this idea of shaping. Okay, so shaping behavior is guiding a creature by towards a behavior, I should say, by rewarding behavior that comes closer and closer to that desired behavior. Okay, so I'll read that for you again. So shaping is guiding a creature toward the behavior, the desired behavior you want that creature to do, by rewarding behavior that comes closer and closer to that desired behavior. And in fact, we do this all the time when we train animals. So if you've had a cat, if you had a dog, other animals, you want them to do specific behaviors. And with these specific behaviors, you're going to reward the behaviors that they're going to do. So when we train Lily, one of the things we want to do is we want to get her to spin around. Okay, to spin around. And so a dog's not going to just suddenly spin around if you say spin or you just kind of encourage it, but rather what we had to do is you had to give her treats and rewards the closer she got to spinning around. Okay, so if she even just looked to the right, we would give her a treat. Okay, if she started looking more to the right, we would give her another treat. Okay, eventually we got her to turn about halfway around, and at that point we gave her a treat. Okay, as she turned around and kind of spun more and more, she did more of that behavior. We gave her more rewards until she finally did the spin itself. She completed that spin. And when she completed that spin, we gave her lots of praise. We were super excited by it. Okay? So there's even folklore that in a class, the students got together and they basically shaped the professor that by having half the class smile and nod at the teacher while the teacher was lecturing, they got the instructor to go all the way to that side of the classroom. Okay, the joke is they even got the professor to almost go out of the classroom by just kind of coordinating efforts, by kind of shaping the professor's behavior, by rewarding that professor only as they were moving towards a particular side of the room. Okay? So shaping is something we do all the time. We do this with animals. I do this with Evie as well. As she's doing desired behavior, I give her more and more rewards. Okay, so if she's working hard on studying, we give her rewards. As she then kind of has good breakthroughs in terms of writing and math and things like that, we give her even kind of more rewards. This is something that we're familiar with. What we're going to do is kind of make it more formalized in terms of talking about how this associative learning occurs. And specifically, we're going to think about this in terms of operant conditioning. So with operant conditioning, this involves adjusting to the consequences of our behavior. Okay, so we go back to the very beginning of Module 18 when we introduced this idea. Okay, we talked about this as being the case that for every behavior we have some type of response to it. Okay, so you guys hung with me, got through the Zoom meeting not going very well for there. So I made sure to, give you a positive consequence to that. I said how much I appreciate you guys doing that. I know it's a hassle when these technological glitches come up and we only have this one means of communicating. And so again, we're going to adjust our behavior based on the consequence of that behavior. So how likely we are to do something based on what we're going to get. Okay? And there's some clear examples of this, others you might think of. We smile more at work after this gets us repeatedly bigger tips. Okay, so if you're a server and you notice, by chatting with a customer or making a recommendation of an item, or just kind of smiling with them gets you bigger tips, well, because of that behavior of engaging with them more, produces a positive response, that means we're more likely then to continue doing that behavior. It's a positive consequence to it, so we're more likely to continue doing it. Your customers have kind of shaped you into being kind of more engaging, more social, being kind of more likely to give them those positive social connections. Okay? We see this too in terms of learning how to ride a bike using strategies that don't make us crash. Okay, so you might think about this kind of a weird way, but the objective of the bike is to not crash. And so to the extent that you're learning how to do this, to the extent that you learn, how to get on the bike the right way, how to kind of push yourself off to get going, and you figure out strategies that then make you successful with that, those are the ones that you're going to continue doing. Okay, so as I'm teaching Evie how to learn how to ride her bike, we're helping her kind of learn through these strategies that help her finish biking and stop without her having to tip the bike over. If she's going to learn strategies on how not to do that, then she's going to be more likely to do those again. And so we can walk through kind of this basic process of how this conditioning occurs. And you guys have kind of heard of the example of kind of the seal bouncing a ball on its nose or bouncing a ball on its nose. All this is done by just operant conditioning through that shaping of the seal's behavior. So the way it works here is a behavioral response is followed by either a reward or punitive feedback. Okay, so everything we do is either going to have some type of reward or some type of punishment associated with it. And what we see here is that behaviors that are reinforced are more likely to be tried again. Behaviors that are punished are less likely to be chosen in the future. Okay, so in shaping the seal's behavior, we're going to reinforce the behavior when the seal does something that it's supposed to, because we want that behavior to happen again. We might punish the seal, okay, in the sense of not giving it a treat, not giving it a reward, not necessarily in terms of harming the seal. The more likely it's doing behaviors that it shouldn't be doing. We can liken this to exactly what's going on with classrooms, especially now that we guys are online. Okay? We're going to reinforce behavior that encourages you to be in class. You might get more rewards. You're more likely to do well on exams to reinforce that behavior of actually being present in class. The more you're doing the behaviors you need to, the better success you should have on the exam. Now, behaviors that go against being successful in class, okay, so not coming to lecture, cramming at the last minute, not studying, those behaviors are likely to be punished in terms of scoring poorly on exams and quizzes. So hopefully it means that you're less likely to do these in the future. So let me kind of walk you through one other instance, and then I'll pause to kind of get the questions you have as we kind of introduce this overall idea of kind of shaping and operant conditioning. Okay? So a child very much works under this operant conditioning idea. Okay? In fact, children, one of the things they'll do is they'll kind of test you because they want to know what the consequences are of their behavior. So in this case, we can think about it for this child. A child associates his response, his behavior with some type of consequence. Okay? For children, a lot of times this is very much kind of the basic step that they go through for learning, that associative learning, very kind of simple process. The child learns to repeat behaviors, such as saying please, which are followed by desirable results. Okay, so if a child says please, and they get a cookie, they know to say please again. Okay, so this is something we want to encourage children to be polite. This is behavior we want them to do, and they start to realize that when they are polite, they do the behaviors we want them to do, that they're then going to be more likely to be rewarded for it. Now, conversely, a child also learns to avoid behaviors which are followed by undesirable results. Okay, so if the child's doing something they shouldn't be doing, and they don't get a reward for that behavior, okay, or maybe they get punishment, they get scolded or loss of dessert, is taking away something, in this case, then they'd be less likely to do that behavior. And so this becomes kind of an interesting example to think about when you see kids having a temper tantrum. Okay, so you've probably been out, a store, a restaurant, at least before the virus was keeping us inside, and a child would have a temper tantrum. Now, the thing for the parent is that if they reward that child when they have the temper tantrum, okay, by giving the child extra attention or just giving in and giving the child what it wants, basically what they've done is they started to operate and condition the child to get what they want out of it. Okay, so now the child knows, hey, if I want something or I want attention, what I can do is I can throw a temper tantrum, I can throw a fit. If the parent either ignores that temper tantrum or punishes the child for the temper tantrum, it means that it's going to lead to the child being less likely to do that behavior. Okay, so I remember I was cooking dinner with Katie. We were in the kitchen with Evie, and Evie was unhappy about something, and so she decided that she was going to throw a temper tantrum. And it was kind of really the first time she had kind of thrown this fit. And I remember Katie and I both looking at each other, knowing exactly what was going on. And I believe I turned to Evie and said, "Is that the best temper tantrum you can come up with?" And we just kind of let her just do her thing and kind of let herself calm her down, but we didn't reward the behavior. Okay, so we didn't, make a big deal out of it. We didn't give her what she wanted. We just kind of let the behavior kind of just go by the wayside. And I'll say that because of that, or maybe partly because of that, we really haven't had her use temper tantrums before. This really isn't something that we reward. But you can see how it'd be easy if you gave in to the child. You start reinforcing this behavior. All right, so let me pause at this point to see what questions you guys have. You can either throw them in over chat, You can just kind of voice them out, but I want to pause to see what questions you have as we kind of set things up, because we're starting to get into kind of more of the details of operant conditioning. And if you're all good, just say something over chat so I know you're well there too. All right, I appreciate the chat responses. Much happier that things are going smoothly now. We got our technological glitch taken care of. Okay. So let's start unpacking operant conditioning a bit more. The first way that we're going to do this is starting to think about Thorndike's law of effect. Okay, so unfortunately, guys, again, another label of a theory that isn't the most helpful for us. So Thorndike's law of effect is this argument that behaviors followed by favorable consequences become more likely, and behaviors followed by unfavorable consequences become less likely. Okay, so we're kind of talking about this before, but where Thorndike demonstrated it is doing things such as having cats get out of a puzzle box. So the puzzle box basically is where the cat has to do a certain action, certain things in orders, such as pressing a lever or moving something over. And once the cat does the right sequence of things, okay, does all the things it needs to, the cat is then let out and gets its reward, which is some type of food item. Now, for a while, it takes a while at the beginning for the cat because, it's all trial and error learning, but the cat starts to quickly learn what behaviors are followed by favorable consequences, meaning that they should keep doing those behaviors to get out, and what behaviors are followed by unfavorable consequences, meaning they're wasted effort. The cat's just keeping themselves from getting to the food. And so we can see is that after about 20 trials, the cat gets pretty good at getting out of that box because they realize that if they do things in a certain order, that they get rewarded. They get rewarded by being able to get out. And so they continue to do that behavior. And Thorndike's law of effect starts to go into kind of B.F. Skinner's thinking. Okay, so Skinner is a classic psychologist. He's well known for this idea of behaviorism. So we've actually talked about Skinner all the way at the beginning of class. We were talking about kind of the different disciplines within psychology. And what Skinner saw is he saw a potential for exploring and using shaping principles more broadly. Okay, so his idea here is that he wondered if he could really get a lot of various behaviors to occur by just simply rewarding or punishing it. Okay, so you kind of almost made the argument that there's really not so much value in thinking about free will and people being able to make more their own choices, but rather understanding how people respond based on the rewards and punishments. Okay, so he starts asking these questions. How can we more carefully measure the effects of consequences on chosen behavior? Okay, so how can we systematically do this where we can look to see, well, how are the behaviors we're doing rewarded or punished, and how do we shape these behaviors? Okay, so if you want to understand, well, how do we get individuals to stay inside and not go out, potentially expose themselves and others to the coronavirus? Okay, how do we then, shape their behaviors? Okay, so how do we, put in the right consequences to get people to stay in? Okay? He also kind of starts to ask this question, well, can other creatures be taught to do these controlled consequences as well? So can we get other animals to do behaviors? Okay, so in this case, Skinner trained pigeons to play ping pong, even guide a video game missile. All these because he rewarded the pigeons, okay, and other animals to act a specific way. Okay? The other piece that he talks about, and hopefully we'll be able to get into this today during our time now, but I'll video if we don't get into it, is what happens if we change the timing of the reinforcement. Okay, so what happens if we give reinforcement all the time or kind of spread out that reinforcement? So not only do we think about the consequences, but we think about this kind of series or sequence of consequences. So when do they happen? How often do we either get rewarded or punished? And so the way that Skinner really approaches some of these larger, broader questions, okay, is through what we call the Skinner box, which is an operant chamber. Okay? And I'll put everything out here so you kind of see the visuals with it as we're talking about it. So Skinner, like other psychologists, okay, wants to have kind of a more controlled method for studying conditioning. Okay? He wants to be able to make careful observations to see how animals are responding to different situations. And so what he does is he develops what's called the operant chamber, again, called the Skinner box in kind of more colloquial terms. And here what he does is it allows us to track the rates of behavioral changes in responses to different reinforcement. Okay, so looking at our box here, okay, we can see that the mouse, or the rat in this case, gets a reward in terms of food. Okay, so the rat, the mouse, is kept kind of at a lower weight, so it's hungry, it wants that food. What the researchers can then do is they can then create associations with different things occurring and then this reward happening. Okay, so they can teach the mouse that if it presses this bar, okay, that it'll get a reward. At first, the mouse just randomly presses the bar by pure trial and error and gets a reward. But eventually, the mouse is going to learn that if it presses that bar, it gets that reward. Okay? And if it gets that reward, then it means that it's going to keep pressing that bar. The researcher then might make it more complex, might make it so that the light has to be on and the mouse has to press the bar before it gets food. Okay? So the mouse will eventually start learning this and it'll start shaping its behavior so we can get it to the point where the mouse is doing exactly what we want it to. We get the mouse to only press the bar when the light's on to get that food. So when you see animals doing complex things such as reading or selecting between two different images, it's not necessarily that they inherently know what that is like we do with our thinking, but rather it's a function of they've been trained. They've been able to discriminate between the stimuli and know which one's going to give them a reward and which one isn't. And that's where we'll kind of delve into here a bit more. So we set up the basics of understanding what operant conditioning is, kind of the history behind it, understand what the operant chamber is. We're going to start to get into some new terminology. But before we do that, though, I want to see if there's any questions on these steps. Okay, so either jump in over chat or over the video. Okay, and I'll pause here for a minute. All right, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll get into our next piece of Module 19. Again, we have kind of these pauses and breaks so that we can kind of break things up for the video. So what we're gonna do here is we'll pause just a second and we'll go ahead and get into it.